first thing that you do in the morning? Yes, just pick up your phone and scroll through the messages to see what is going on in the world and what is going on in everybody else's life. Believe me, whether we are there or not, the world will not stop. The world will go on. What is important is how we want to go about in this world. What is the experience of this world that we want to have? So every morning that you get up, the first thing is to tell yourself, fill your mind with positive thoughts, with positive ideas. Tell yourself every morning, remind yourself every morning that all power is within you and you can do anything and everything. Because yes, actually this is true. If you do not love yourself, how can you go about in the world and tell anybody that love me? If you do not believe in yourself, how can you ask anybody else that believe in me? If you do not push yourself, who will? So yes, actually, all the power is within you to make the life how you want it to be. Realize it and remind it to yourself every morning. With this, we start with a very important topic of the year, and that is conditions of inner ear. Now, the conditions of the inner ear, we have divided into various small parts. Now, we know that the inner ear consists of mainly two parts. We have the part for hearing and we have the part for balance, right? So the conditions of the inner ear, we have divided into the conditions which involve the whole of the inner ear, which means that they involve the cochlear as well as the vestibular part, which means that the patient will present with us with both hearing loss as well as vertigo. The second is the conditions which involve only the vestibular part, which means where the patient will present only with vertigo. And the third is the conditions which involve only the cochlear part, that is the patient will present only with hearing loss. What type of hearing loss? Yes, sensorineural hearing loss. So in the first module, what we are going to do is the conditions which will involve the whole of the inner ear. So these conditions which involve the whole of the labyrinth and present with both hearing loss and vertigo are Meniere's, superior semicircular canal dehiscence, perilymph fistula, labyrinthitis, and ototoxicity. So the first condition that we are going to do here is Meniere's. Now what is Meniere's? Meniere's is another name for endolymphatic hydrops. Endolymphatic hydrops. Okay, so what does this term tell you? Yes, that the endolymph has increased in amount. Where is the endolymph present? Scala media. Did I hear scala media? Or is it present in the whole of the membranous labyrinth? Yes, it is present in the whole of membranous labyrinth, which means that the features of Meniere's will not only be restricted to scala media. They will be present because of dilatation of whole of the membranous labyrinth. But yes, the symptoms will start because of dilatation of scala media. Why? Because the production of endolymph is occurring in the scala media from the stria vascularis. Later on, it will progress to involve the utricle and saccule also. The semicircular canals are usually not involved. They are involved the least. So, there are no symptoms because of involvement of semicircular canals. Here, we will see features because of involvement of almost whole of the membranous labyrinth. But the presenting features will be because of involvement of scala media. Because the dilatation occurs from the scala media. And when the scala media gets dilated because of the hydrops, which part will get dilated first? Yes, this is the most dependent here. The apex. So the dilatation will start from the apex and then it will go to the base, then it will involve the utricle and then the saccule and the utricle, which means that yes, in Meniere's we will have features of hearing loss, we will have features of imbalance, and if there is hearing loss, what hearing loss? We already know when the inner ear is involved, it is sensorineural hearing loss. And what frequency will be involved first? If I tell you that the apex is involved first, yes, low frequency will be involved first. So all that we are going to see in some time, but what we are seeing now is that yes, the endolymphatic hydrops involves the whole of the membranous labyrinth. It will start from the scala media, so the symptoms will start from the scala media and progress to rest of the parts. But why at all has the endolymph increased in amount? Endolymph, why is it increasing? Yes, we know production occurs from the stria vascularis. There we have the sodium potassium chloride channels. So it can occur either because of sodium and water retention. Or it can occur because of decreased absorption. Decreased absorption occurs from where? From endolymphatic sac. So if the absorption is not occurring properly, again there can be increase in endolymph. So why this is increasing? Why sodium and water retention is occurring? Why the absorption is not occurring? Mostly it is not known. So mostly the cause of Meniere's, the etiology is not known. It is idiopathic. It is idiopathic. Sometimes the cause is known that it has occurred, the absorption is hampered because of the endolymphatic sac getting involved because of some trauma of the temporal bone, or because of the autosclerosis. When the overgrowth of bone occurs over the foot plate area, it can go into the inner ear and it can involve the inner ear. That has led to either increased production or decreased absorption, leading to Meniere's. So when we know the cause, that is what is known as secondary Meniere's. That is known as secondary Meniere's. It is secondary to something that we know of. And also has been postulated here a genetic cause, a mutation. Genetic, that occurs very rarely, only in 10 to 15% of the cases. It has been postulated that there has been a mutation in the short arm of chromosome 6. Short arm of chromosome 6, which has led to all the factors which have ultimately led to increase in production or decrease in absorption, leading to hydrops of the endolymph. Now also another important thing that we need to know is it more common in males or is it more common in females? So yes, this has been asked in your exam, and the male is to female ratio, different books mention it differently. Scott Brown mentions it as it is same, it is 1:1. So this is what we have to follow. It is same in male as well as in female. So now we know whatever the cause, exact cause is usually not possible to know. So whatever the cause, usually what happens is that the endolymph has increased in amount, and first to be dilated is scala media, so which means that the presenting symptoms will be because of dilatation of scala media. So now let us see what happens because of dilatation of scala media. So here you are first going to tell me what these things are. I am going to quickly tell you. Yes, 1, what is 1? Tell me what is 1? Yes, this is the basilar membrane. Very good. Tell me what is 2? 2 is? Very good, Reisner's membrane. 3, what is 3? Yes, tectorial membrane. And what is 4? Very good, organ of Corti. What is present here in the scala media? What fluid is present in the scala media? Quickly. Yes, endolymph. What is present in the scala vestibula here? What is present here? Perilymph. What is more in endolymph? What is more in endolymph? Sodium or potassium? Yes, potassium. What is more in perilymph? Sodium or potassium? Yes, this is like extracellular, outside. That is how we remembered. Yes, what is this structure here? What is this? This is stria vascularis, the site of production of endolymph. So now what has happened is that the endolymph has increased in amount. So now because of endolymph increasing in amount, where is it present? In the scala media. So the scala media will start getting dilated. It will get dilated. So when it gets dilated, what happens? The Reisner's membrane will start bulging. It gets dilated more, it bulges more, it gets dilated more. Now the Reisner's membrane ruptures. Yes, so when the Reisner's membrane ruptures, can you imagine why it has ruptured? Because of so much of pressure in the scala media, and this sudden rupture of the Reisner's membrane will lead to gush of the endolymph outside. This will create an imbalance in the fluid compartments of the inner ear, of the endolymph and the perilymph, and this will lead to the first symptom of Meniere's, and that is vertigo. Is that clear? So the presenting feature of Meniere's, presenting symptoms, it is because of what? It is because of scala media, and the first symptom, the first is vertigo. First is vertigo. So you just saw why vertigo is occurring. Yes, it is occurring because of the sudden rupture of the Reisner's membrane and an imbalance in the pressure of the fluid compartment. So now what will happen next? Now when it has ruptured, the perilymph will go inside into the scala media, and there will be mixing of the endolymph and perilymph, and now this increased sodium inside here will lead to damage of the hair cells. So damage of the hair cells of the organ of Corti, that will lead to the second symptom. Can you tell me what that will be? Yes, that will be hearing loss. So the second symptom will be hearing loss. Yes, what type of hearing loss? Yes, we know it is organ of Corti. So what hearing loss? Yes, it is the sensorineural hearing loss. If I ask you what frequency will be affected first? Yes, earliest will be the low frequency that will be affected. low frequency, that will be affected. So now what will happen is, now because of the mixing, now the pressure gradually will equalize on both the sides. So when the pressure is equalized, now what will happen is that the rhinous membrane will start healing. Pressure is okay now. So now the rhinous membrane will start healing. So the rhinous membrane will gradually heal. So once the rhinous membrane has healed, once the pressure is equalized, the vertigo will be fine. Yes, which means that the vertigo of Meniere's is not a chronic vertigo for days together. Yes, it is. In which patient will be think that this patient, the vertigo can be because of Meniere's? Yes, the vertigo is only for 20 minutes to maximum 24 hours. So in this much of time, the pressure will equalize after the rupture and the vertigo will be fine. And also now gradually what will happen is, once the pressure is okay, gradually the hair cells will regenerate. Whatever have not got completely damaged, they will regenerate. So hearing, it will improve. Till patient has again another episode of Meniere's, again bulging, again rupture, again mixing, again hearing loss. What is this type of hearing loss known as? Yes, this is fluctuating. So it is a fluctuating hearing loss. In the hearing loss, we need to know that it is fluctuating. Any other condition you know of where the hearing loss fluctuates? Usually we know that hearing loss can be the fluctuating or it can be progressive. It will slowly progress. Yes. Now here in Meniere's, the patient will typically experience that there is a fluctuating hearing loss. The hearing loss occurs only during the episodes of vertigo. Later on, the hearing improves. Gradually, when there is repeated rupture and repeated damage to the hair cells, maybe the hearing loss will not come back to perfectly normal as it was earlier. So it will progress also gradually. But the hearing loss that the patient immediately during the episodes notices is that during the episode, the hearing loss is too bad, whereas later on it improves. So that is fluctuating. Yes, anywhere else? I was asking you, you have heard of fluctuating hearing loss? Yes, in serositis media, the adenoid size fluctuates. So the collection of fluid also fluctuates in the middle ear. That was also fluctuating hearing loss. You remember that? Did you tell me that? Yes? Yes. So just remember, wherever there is fluid, there is fluctuation. Fluid in the middle ear, serositis media, there is fluctuating hearing loss. Fluid in the inner ear, in Meniere's, again there is fluctuation. Now also, the organ of Corti is responsible for fine tuning of frequency as well as for fine tuning of loudness. So now because of the fluid increasing, because of the pressure increasing in the scala media, there is distortion of the organ of Corti. So that leads to this function of the inner ear getting affected. So now what will happen is there will be loss of fine tuning. Loss of fine tuning. Fine tuning of what? Fine tuning of both. Fine tuning of frequency as well as fine tuning of loudness of sound. So how will this present in the patient? When the tuning of frequency is not there, which means that whatever frequency is actually going inside, that is not sensed as that frequency, that particular frequency. So one sound the patient is hearing, one ear is normal. This is a unilateral condition. Yes, this is unilateral. So one ear is normal, that is sensing that sound as exactly the frequency that is going inside the ear. Whereas in the other ear where there is Meniere's, there is distortion. That frequency is being sensed at some other frequency. Yes, so this distortion of frequency of the same sound in both the ears will lead to a double hearing. The patient will hear as if there is two sounds that he is hearing of two different frequencies. That is what is known as diplacusis. Diplacusis. So frequency distortion will lead to diplacusis. Whereas loudness distortion, there will be a distortion of the loudness also of the sound. What will happen is that whenever there is a loud sound, now because of fine tuning is gone, that loud sound will be perceived as abnormally loud. Yes, so patient will not be able to tolerate loud sounds, and that is what is known as recruitment. How will you know that? Can you just talk to the patient and can you know that the patient has recruitment? Yes, we have done that earlier. When you talk to the patient normally, he will tell that I cannot hear, because this loudness distortion occurs during loud sound. So when the loudness is not very much, when the loudness is normal, that the patient is not able to perceive because of the hearing loss, because of the sensorial hearing loss. So he will tell I cannot hear, can't you speak a little louder? But the moment you speak loud, what the patient tells you? Come on, why are you shouting? Yes. So why? Because there is the loud sounds are being perceived as abnormally loud. This is what is known as recruitment. Recruitment. So there is loudness distortion. Loudness distortion, but only of loud sounds. Of loud sounds. Of loud sounds. Recruitment is intolerance to loud sounds. So what we are seeing till now is, that because of the endolymph, because of the increased pressure, there is rupture leading to vertigo, and that vertigo will gradually improve in over 24 hours. So always in your question, the history will be given. Patient comes with vertigo for 2 hours, for 4 hours, for 6 hours. Yes, never more than 24 hours. And it will also not be very few seconds. So vertigo for a few seconds. It has to be at least 20 minutes. And this patient will typically tell that I feel that I'm hearing two sounds. I feel that the loud sounds, I'm totally, when my child shouts or when the TV is loud, I feel like like closing my ear. It is intolerable to me. Yes. Now, another symptom that the patient will have is tinnitus. What is tinnitus? Yes, ringing in the ear is what is known as tinnitus. So, which means that when we hear the bells ringing outside, ting, 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 are we having tinnitus that time? No? Or yes? Tinnitus is ringing in the ear without any external stimuli. So, is tinnitus specific to mean ears? Is tinnitus seen only in mean ears? No, any condition of the ear, if it leads to any conductive or sensorial hearing loss, it can lead to tinnitus. Tinnitus can be either subjective and only the patient is hearing the tinnitus, only the patient is hearing the sound, or it can be objective and even the examiner can hear it. So the tinnitus, which is a subjective tinnitus, can occur because of any hearing loss, any conductive or sensorial hearing loss, whereas tinnitus, which is objective, which is loud enough that even the examiner can hear it, it can be heard like a brew, like how we can hear the brew also, the brew sound, so it can be heard like that with a steth. So that objective, for the tinnitus to be objective, the cause has to be a vascular cause. This is not a vascular cause. What are the cause of objective tinnitus? We will see that later on. For now, what we are seeing is that in mean ears, yes, there is tinnitus, but that is a subjective tinnitus. That is not an objective tinnitus. And again, when another important symptom that the patient reports is fullness of the ear. Fullness. So yes, these are the presenting features of mean ears, and these are the symptoms that we have to look for in any patient when the patient comes to us, or in any question to diagnose that this is a patient of mean ears. So there will be the presenting feature. The first symptom will be vertigo. Without vertigo, will you ever think of mean ears? Never. Only if there is sensorial hearing loss. I have seen that sometimes in the question is given only sensorial hearing loss. And there you start thinking that this can be mean ears. Okay, inner ear, this can be mean ears. That is why I have divided this module into 3 parts. The conditions which can cause hearing loss as well as vertigo. So in mean ears, the first symptom is vertigo. Without vertigo, you can never think of mean ears. Is that clear? The first symptom is vertigo, followed by hearing loss. There is tinnitus and there is fullness of the ear. What is the characteristic of vertigo? Quickly tell me. Characteristic of vertigo? Yes. It will be 20 minutes, so maximum 24 hours. What will be the characteristic of hearing loss? Yes, the patient will have hearing loss only during the episodes of vertigo. So it will be a fluctuating hearing loss. And also patient will have distortion. Because of the distortion of the organ of cortex, there will be distortion of everything of the sound. What is everything of sound? Sound, we know 2 parameters we mentioned. One is the frequency, one is the loudness. So both the parameters will be distorted. Frequency will be distorted. So he is hearing 2 frequency sound in the ear. That is what is diplecusis. Loudness will be distorted only of what sound? Of loud sounds. So that will present as intolerance to loud sounds. Loud sounds becoming abnormally loud. That is what is known as recruitment. Yes. So now we are very clear what is happening in the scala media, and whatever is happening in the scala media, that is leading to which symptoms in the patient. Is that clear? Now, when the dilatation will progress, it will go into the utricle and saccule. So, let us see what will happen because of dilatation of utricle and saccule. Now, in the utricle and saccule, what do we have? Yes, we have the maculae. Yes. And if I ask you, utricle and saccule is present in what? Utricle and saccule is present in which part of the bony labyrinth? Yes, it is present in vestibule. We know that. And vestibule is connected to middle ear by Yes, it is connected through the oval window. Through the oval window to the foot plate of stapes. Now what has happened? Because of dilatation of the utricle and saccule, now the utricle and saccule will bulge. See? They will occupy a lot of area of the vestibule, and now can you make out that the utricle and saccule has come so near to the foot plate? Yes, so there will be two symptoms because of dilatation of utricle and saccule. One is because of dilatation inside and the other is because of dilatation outside. Dilatation inside means that because of dilatation inside, what is happening inside is distortion of the maculae, like how distortion of organ of Corti was occurring there. Here what is inside is maculae, so there will be distortion of maculae. What is macula responsible for? For linear acceleration. So when that gets distorted, the linear acceleration will not be normal. What will happen? Patient will be walking. Suddenly he will fall down. Again he will get up. He will walk. Again he will fall down. So he will go to the ortho OPD. Yes, he will go to Dr. Abbas. He will examine everything and he will tell perfect. Muscles perfect, bone perfect, everything normal. He will refer to the neurosurgeon, neurology. Yes, he will refer to Dr. Rakesh. Yes, and then he will tell, Dr. Rakesh will tell, everything normal. Yes. So where is the problem? Where is the problem? Problem is in the utricle and saccule. Yes, problem is in the ear. Problem is in the linear sensing mechanism. And this is what is known as drop attacks. Drop attacks. Or it is known as Tumarkin crisis. Tumarkin crisis. So this is because of distortion of the maculae. And the second is because of dilatation outside. Because of dilatation outside, what is happening? See, it is coming so close to the foot plate. So now when the foot plate will move more, as in loud sounds. Usually in loud sounds, the foot plate, when it moves more, it does not stimulate the utricle and saccule so much that it can lead to vertigo. So now what is happening is it is so close. So now the loud sounds when it makes the foot plate move more. Yes, the foot plate initially moves more till the stapedial reflex gets activated. So now when the foot plate moves more, patient will have stimulation of utricle and saccule leading to vertigo. So patient will have vertigo on loud sounds. Vertigo on loud sounds. Yes, so you can remember it like this. You can remember it as because of dilatation inside. Because of dilatation inside, there is drop attacks. Okay. Because of dilatation outside, what is happening is there is vertigo and loud sounds. And do you remember what is vertigo and loud sounds known as? This is what is known as Tullio's phenomena. Tullio's phenomena. Also, when there are excessive pressure changes, when the foot plate moves more because of pressure changes, for example, in coughing, in sneezing, in lifting heavy weights, yes, or there are pressure changes as in Bero, when there are pressure changes when you travel in flight. So now what will happen is now the foot plate will touch the utricle and saccule, stimulate it leading to vertigo. So there will be vertigo on loud sounds and vertigo on pressure changes. On pressure changes. And what is vertigo on pressure changes known as? This is what is known as Henneberg sign. This is known as Henneberg sign. Yes. So now what we are seeing is that because of dilatation of utricle and saccule, patient will have vertigo on loud sounds, patient will have vertigo on pressure changes, and also what patient will have is drop attacks or Tumarkin crisis. Yes, this Tumarkin crisis was present in one CEO of BMW. And it was diagnosed when he was taking a lecture somewhere, and on the stage he kept on, when he was walking here and there, he kept on falling down. That was the first episode of Tumarkin crisis that he had, and it was diagnosed. Yes, he had episodes of vertigo earlier also, and then it was typically noticed that this is the typical Tumarkin crisis or the drop attacks that this patient is having because of Meniere's. So yes, the patient of Meniere's will have vertigo on loud sounds and have vertigo on pressure changes, but that will not be only vertigo. It is not that patient will have vertigo only on loud sounds and on pressure changes. patient will have Tullio's phenomena, patient will have Henneberg sign, but along with that, they are not diagnostic of Meniere's. Is that clear? The vertigo that is diagnostic of Meniere's is when the patient has vertigo lasting, continuous, severe, acute onset vertigo lasting for 20 minutes to 24 hours. These episodes you should have. Tullio's phenomena and Henneberg sign can be seen in other conditions also. Which other conditions? That we will gradually see when we see the other conditions of the inner ear. So now we are clear how the presentation of a patient of Meniere's will be. Okay. So now you are sitting here in the ENT OPD and here is a patient who has come to you with vertigo. Yes, we know any patient of vertigo, we have to think of Meniere's. So immediately you ask the history, since when is the vertigo? He's telling you, I'm having since the past 6 hours, I'm having very severe vertigo. Okay, so now you can think of Meniere's. So now you want to rule out whether it is Meniere's or not. You ask for more history. Yes, you ask him whether there is hearing loss or not, because if there is hearing loss, you will localize that, yes, this is the ear. Hearing loss, tinnitus, fullness in the ear, all this will tell you that yes, you are dealing with the ear. This patient has vertigo because of ear condition. So yes, he will give you the history of tinnitus. He will give you the history of ear fullness. He will give you the history of hearing loss. What will be the typical hearing loss? Yes, the typical hearing loss will be fluctuating. So all this, when you are seeing, you know that this vertigo can be Meniere's, and now you want to confirm that this is Meniere's or not. Yes, you want to confirm that this is inner ear that is involved or not. So now what you do is you examine the ear of the patient. You see external ear, middle ear, everything is normal. So likely the inner ear is only involved and you want to confirm. So now you take out your tuning fork. So you do Rini's, and what will you find in Rini's? If this is Meniere's, what will be the Rini's? Rini's will be positive or negative? Yes, Rini's will be positive. Rini's is positive in which two conditions? Yes, in normal and in sensorineural hearing loss. Here if it is Meniere's, if the inner ear is involved, sensorineural hearing loss. Yes, Weber's, is it unilateral condition or bilateral condition? Meniere's is unilateral. So suppose there is right ear Meniere's, Weber's will be towards which side? Yes, Weber's is bone conduction. So there is sensorineural hearing loss in this side. Weber's, that is bone conduction, that is sensorineural pathway, that will be heard better in the other ear, in the normal ear. So this will be towards the normal side. Towards the normal side. ABC, absolute bone conduction. Yes, bone conduction, ABC, the name itself tells you bone conduction. It is a measure of the bone conduction or the sensorineural pathway. So in sensorineural defect, in inner ear defect, it will be short. It will be less than normal. It will be shortened. Schauback is same as ABC for sensorineural hearing loss. Yes, so Schauback also will be shortened. So now when the patient came with vertigo and he's telling you I'm having hearing loss, now you want to confirm whether it is sensorineural or not. Yes, only when you have confirmed that there is sensorineural hearing loss, you can know that this is the inner ear that is involved. So this Rini's, this Weber's, ABC tuning, the Schauback, all this told you that this is a patient who has a sensorineural hearing loss also, which means that the defect is in the inner ear. So now you want to confirm it further by a audiogram, and yes, in audiogram, will you see the AB gap? Is it a sensorineural hearing loss? Yes, it is sensorineural hearing loss. Will you see AB gap? No, AB gap will be absent. And here in Meniere's, what frequency of sound is affected early? Low frequency. So if low frequency is affected early, what will be the slope of the graph? Yes, it will be upsloping. It will be upsloping. So which means that you will see a graph like this. So what we are seeing here in the audiogram, this is which is the right ear. Whenever we see the audiogram, what we want to see is which ear first. Yes. So here we are seeing that this red is the right ear. The symbol is telling you, round is telling you it is right ear. So this is the right ear, and this what we are seeing, the symbols are telling you the cross, and this is opening towards the left, so that is telling you that this is the left ear. Yes, so which means both the ears have been given here. Now let us see whether it is normal or not. We know that up till 25 decibel it is normal. So what we are seeing is that the right ear is normal, whereas left ear is defective. It is defective mainly in what frequencies? In the low frequencies. So in the low frequencies there is defect, and what is the defect? Is there any AB gap? No, both the air conduction and bone conduction are affected. Air conduction is a measure of conductive plus sensorineural pathway. Bone conduction is a measure of only sensorineural pathway. If both are effective, it means that defect is in the common pathway. So here we are not seeing any AB gap. That quickly tells us that this is a sensorineural hearing loss. So yes, in this patient there is a left sensorineural hearing loss affecting low frequencies. So this will point your diagnosis more towards that, yes, this is a patient of Meniere's who came to you with vertigo, with hearing loss, where you found out the hearing loss, confirmed again by PTA that this is a sensorineural hearing loss, it is a defect of the inner ear, and what you're seeing is low frequency. So apex of cochlea is getting affected earlier. So later on, other frequencies can also be affected. But early, why do we say early and why do we say low frequency is affected early? That is important to us. Yes, because what is our aim? Our aim is to diagnose the patient when the patient has first come to us. And if the patient has vertigo, will he not present early? Yes, so when the patient is presented, it is that time that we should be able to diagnose that this is Meniere's. Yes, so now what will we see at that time? We will see a low frequency hearing loss. So yes, this is what you will see in the audiogram, and now your suspicion has increased. This is Meniere's and you want to confirm. So what are the confirmatory tests that you will do for Meniere's? Yes, we know in Meniere's there is loudness distortion. Because of that, that is recruitment. So we will test for recruitment. How do we test that? Yes, by Shunt Increment Sensitivity Index. What we do here is we give the patient a loud sound and then we give increment of 1111 decibel. 50 decibel, 51 decibel, 52 decibel, 53 decibel, and then we see how many 1 decibel increment he is able to identify. In our ears, whether you give us a 50 decibel or 51 decibel, 55 decibel, 56 decibel, it will appear to us same. But in these people, because of recruitment, the loud sound become abnormally loud. They are able to find out that these two are different sounds. So the CC score, if you give them 20 increments of 1 decibel, they will be able to identify 70 to 100% of the 1 decibel increment that you have given them. So the CC score will be 70 to 100%. What will be the impedance? Impedance is a test for middle ear, no? Are we doing it for inner ear also, for cochlea also? Yes, impedance has two parts. Tympanometry, which is to tell you about condition of middle ear, and the second part is stapedial reflex. Stapedial reflex, will it be altered if there is a cochlear pathology, if it is a defect in the organ of Corti? Yes. What is the defect here? Recruitment. Loud sounds are becoming abnormally loud. How do you test stapedial reflex? You give a 70 decibel sound. You give a 70 decibel sound and then you see that the stapedial reflex is present or not. So in this patient, if you give a 50 decibel sound also, the 50 decibel sound will be abnormally increased to maybe a 70 or 90 decibel sound in this patient because of recruitment. So a stapedial reflex, which usually you get only when you give a 70 or 80 or 90, above 70 decibel sound, this will be elicited in the patient even at a low loudness, like maybe 50 decibel sound. Yes, so the threshold of stapedial reflex, will decrease. So even at 50 decibel, you will get a positive stapedial reflex. Stapedial reflex can tell you any hearing loss, conductive also, sensory also, neural also. It's a very, very important test. Most important thing about this is an objective test. This is not, patient's cooperation is not required, and within a few seconds you can know conductive, you can know sensory, you can know neural. Yes, so now your suspicion is very high and you want to go for the confirmatory test to tell you that this is Meniere's. And what is that test? That is electrocochleography. So what is electrocochleography? Yes, in electrocochleography, what you do is you pass a probe. Can you see this probe? It's like a needle-like probe. It is passed through the tympanic membrane, be placed over the promontory area, so that a sound is given through that, and it whatever activity occurs in response to the sound in the organ of Corti is very nicely picked up by the probe. And this is recorded in the form of a recording where you get various graphs, where you get various waves. And what are the waves that are important to us? Are two waves, summating potential and action potential. What is summating potential? It is sum of all the activity of inner and outer hair cell. What is action potential? Potential of the nerve, the cochlear nerve, that is starting from the organ of Corti. So what in electrocochleography will tell you that yes, this is Meniere's? What is happening in Meniere's? We know that the endolymph has increased and there is rupture and there is mixing of endolymph and perilymph, and there is lot of activity of the hair cells. Why? Because the sodium is increasing here. Sodium will enter into the hair cells. It will lead to repeated depolarization. Yes, so the hair cell activity, combined inner and outer hair cell activity, will be increased a lot. Whereas this activity is not because of sound, so it will not get transmitted to the nerve. So the summation potential will increase, whereas action potential will remain same. It will not increase. So when the numerator increases, ultimately what happens is that this ratio will increase. So this ratio is normally supposed to be less than 0.3. 3 or less than 30%. So if it increases to more than 30%, it is suggestive of Meniere's. And if it goes furthermore, if it goes more than 45%, then that is diagnostic of Meniere's. So much of increase in the hair cell activity, yes. So that is diagnostic of Meniere's. So along with testing the electrocochleography, we do another test here. Yes, we give glycerol to the patient. So when the electrocochleography test is being done, you give glycerol to the patient. And when you give glycerol to the patient, what happens is glycerol is hygroscopic. So it reduces the eye drops. So immediately you will see the change in the values of electrocochleography. You will also see a change in the vertigo, in the symptoms of the patient when you give glycerol. So that is known as glycerol test. The glycerol test is positive, and electrocochleography SP by AP is more than 45%, that is diagnostic of Meniere's. Now another very recent test for confirming that is Meniere's is what you do is through the tympanic membrane, and you pass a needle, and that you pass through the round window, and you give gadolinium contrast into the inner ear. So when you're passing it through the round window, in which compartment it is going? Through the round window, it will go into the scala tympani. Yes, that is how we remember secondary tympanic membrane. So it is connected to the scala tympani, that is in the perilymphatic compartment. And now then you go for a MRI. So if there is no communication between the perilymph and the endolymph, then you will see this contrast only in the perilymph. Whereas if there is Meniere's, if the rupture of this Reissner's membrane has occurred and there is mixing of endolymph and perilymph, then what you will see is that this dye can be seen both in the endolymph and the perilymph. So that has been a new advancement for the diagnosis of Meniere's. So this patient who came to you with vertigo and hearing loss, with tinnitus, with fullness in the ear, and maybe with the complaints of vertigo on loud sounds or on pressure changes, now you have confirmed that yes, you are having Meniere's. Yes. Now there can be a variant of Meniere's also. Now this variant of Meniere's is what is known as Lermois syndrome. What is Lermois syndrome? It has been postulated that this occurs, there is the otoconia which is present in the saccule. Yes, the otoconia which is present in the saccule, it gets dislodged because of whatever reasons, and it blocks the connection between the saccule and the scala media. We know that there is otoconia in the maculae, we know that, right? And we know that in the utricle, if the otoconia gets dislodged, they can go into the semicircular canal, they can lead to positional vertigo. So something like that can happen in the saccule also, that the otoconia can get dislodged, and now when they get dislodged, where they go into the and block this connection between the saccule and the scala media. Now what happens is, now the endolymph is not properly able to drain, so the pressure of the endolymph in the scala media increases, leading to distortion of the hair cells of the organ of Corti, leading to hearing loss. So what is Lermois syndrome is that first there is hearing loss. In Lermois syndrome, there is first hearing loss, and then the pressure goes on increasing till it pushes, because of the pressure, this otolith which has blocked there, it is pushed into the saccule. So that pushing leads to that sudden increase in the pressure, that pushing leads to a change of the pressure changes, leading to vertigo. So, and now when the pushing has occurred, now the pressure, when this as the otolith which was blocking has got dislodged, now the pressure in the scala media will become normal. So now the organ of Corti will become normal, and the pressure over it, the distortion, all has disappeared, and the hearing will come back to normal. So what is Lermois syndrome is that first there occurs hearing loss. Later on, there is a sudden episode of vertigo. Okay, there is sudden vertigo, and following vertigo, the hearing becomes normal. Now this Lermois syndrome is a very, very rare presentation, and this only maybe a handful of cases have been diagnosed till date. But yes, this is something that is sometimes asked in your exam, that as reverse Meniere's. What is reverse Meniere's? Usually what is the first symptom of Meniere's? Vertigo, followed by hearing loss. Here what is happening is reverse. There is hearing loss followed by vertigo, and following which the hearing loss becomes normal. So this is also known as reverse Meniere's, or it is known as Lermois syndrome. So now we know that when a patient who has come to you with vertigo, how you are going to confirm that this is because of Meniere's. So you have confirmed in this patient, and now this patient is vertiginous. The patient is disturbed, he is in vertigo, do something. Now in Meniere's, mostly it is idiopathic. We do not know the cause, why the endolymph has increased, why the either the production has increased or the absorption has decreased. Whatever has happened, cause we do not know, which means that even if we have confirmed that this is Meniere's, we cannot treat the cause, which means that what we can treat is only the symptoms. Yes, what we can do is that we do not know why this is occurring. We know, but that patient is having vertigo, patient is vertiginous, patient is disturbed. What we can do is we can treat the symptoms. So our management of Meniere's mainly aims at managing the symptoms of the patient, and the main disturbing symptom is what? Is vertigo. So our main management will be management of vertigo in a patient of Meniere's. So how will we manage? Yes, the first thing is the prevention. And prevention, you told me when I started, you told me you will tell me. Yes. So what will we avoid? Yes, sodium, salt restriction. Had been asked that salt restricted diet is given in which condition of the year? Then you think here it is given for hypertension, no? It is given in which condition of the year? Yes, in Meniere's. So because salt and water retention can increase the production of endolymph. So that is why it is for prevention we give salt restricted diet. Salt restriction. Also, it has been postulated that everything, because the exact cause is not known, so it has been postulated that maybe it is a vascular compromise, the internal auditory artery, the labyrinthine artery spasm, which is precipitating all these things to occur. So that is why anything which leads to vasoconstriction should be avoided in the diet. So what is that? That is caffeine restriction. Caffeine restriction. So in the prevention, that is what we can do. And also now what is the main management is patient is vertiginous. He has come to you. So you will have to give him relief for vertigo. So what is the relief for vertigo? Yes, you should be knowing, all of you should be knowing. You will have so many people in the house, in your community, your friends, maybe sometimes you also who will feel that you are having vertigo. So at least you should know what are the medicines that you should give for vertigo. Go to any chemist and ask. He will give you all these medicines. Yes, which medicines? Yes, we give labyrinthine sedatives. Labyrinthine sedatives. Labyrinthine sedatives. Which are the labyrinthine sedatives? Have you heard of Phenargan? Promethazine. Promethazine. Yes, have you heard of Stemetil, very commonly used? Yes, that is prochlorperazine. So these are labyrinthine sedatives. Also Cinnarizine. Yes, Cinnarizine is the antihistaminic. Now why are we using it here? Yes, it is being used here because of its calcium channel blockade property. So Cinnarizine, which comes in many trade names. Yes, go to any chemist and tell I am having vertigo, I am having chakkar. He will give you all this, and then see what the trade names, what the constituents are. The constituents will be this. So what you give is, you give labyrinthine sedatives, and also what you give is, you give vasodilators. Vasodilators. Why vasodilators? Vasodilators, they have been shown to increase the reabsorption of endolymph. So decrease the eye drops, though the immediate effect like labyrinthine sedatives will not happen when you give vasodilators. But yes, gradually they will cause vasodilatation, they will cause reabsorption, and they will heal the process, they will help the patient. So this vasodilator, the most common vasodilator that is used is beta-histine. A repeated question of your exam, beta-histine. And beta-histine is a derivative of histamine. It is a histamine derivative. So sometimes instead of asking that beta-histine is used in which condition, what is asked is histamine derivative is given for which condition. Usually we know histamine, we do not give histamine, that will cause so much of vasodilatation, it causes allergic reactions. We give antihistaminics usually. So here what we are giving is the histamine derivative, beta-histine, and there is a very safe histamine derivative. Yes, you must have heard Vertin, Betavert, all that. Yes, these are trade names of beta-histine. So you use vasodilators, histamine derivative, and also you give diuretics. Diuretics, acetozolamide you give thiazide derivatives. So all these are aimed to reduce the eye drops, reduce the increased endolymph, and to benefit the vertigo of the patient. Now, if in spite of giving the medical management, patient does not benefit, patient is having repeated episodes of vertigo. You know how debilitating this is? this is such a acute onset, such severe vertigo that even if the patient is having one episode of vertigo in a month also, forget about 15 days or forget about every week, patient is so disturbed that he will feel so scared. He does not know when he will have it. But he knows that if he has it, he will be just down. He will not be able to walk. He will not be able to get up on its own. So he cannot drive. He does not want to go to the office. He's so scared. So now if the patient's symptoms are not benefiting by medical management, he is having repeated episodes of vertigo. Now we know that we cannot treat the cause. We do not know what the exact cause is. The vertigo, the medicines that we are giving, oral medicines, that is not helping. So now what we can do is we can aim at destroying the sensing mechanism. What is sensing mechanism? We know that in the inner ear, whatever disturbance is occurring, rupture, mixing, all that cannot be controlled. What can be controlled is that we can destroy the vestibular hair cells, the vestibular sensory end organ, to pick up the vestibular imbalance. Now also what can be done is low pressure therapy, which can be given transtympanically to affect the inner ear. So what is this device is? It produces low pressure in the external auditory canal, pressure enough to be transmitted into the inner ear, and it has been postulated that what this does is it causes redistribution of the endolimb. So that manages wherever the increase, there is more of endolimb, the pressure is increasing, it will redistribute it. So this is what is known as the Minute device. The effectiveness is not too much, but yes, something can be given. So that is what is known as the Minute device. MENIETT, Minute device. Now, if in any patient of Meniere's, you are giving the patient management for the acute vertigo, yes, but the patient is okay, fine, but later on the patient is having repeated episodes of vertigo again and again and again. Like even if this patient has vertigo once in a month just, yes, this vertigo is so debilitating. This is a acute onset, sudden vertigo, very severe vertigo. Patient will not know when he will have this. He's so debilitated, he's so scared, he does not know, he does not want to drive, he cannot drive, he cannot go to the office, he's not free to move around in the house or to go for a walk, anything. He becomes so debilitated. So if the episodes are very, very repeated, in spite of the medical management, if the patient is not benefiting, if in spite of diuretics, in spite of Minute device, in spite of giving him vasodilators, he is not benefiting, he is having the episodes very, very frequently, then in that case what we can do is, we know we do not know why this pressure has increased, why the rupture is occurring, so all that we cannot stop. But what we can stop is that this imbalance in the inner ear, that is getting sensed by the hair cells of the vestibular apparatus of the Christian maculae, that is getting sensed by that, and that is perceived as vertigo. So what we can do is we can damage that sensing apparatus. The sensing apparatus, the sensory end organs of balance, that we can damage, so that whatever imbalance is occurring, let it occur. We cannot treat that. We can stop the inner ear from sensing that imbalance. Yes. So what we can do is we can put certain drugs into the inner ear through a device which is known as microwick. So what is this microwick? This is a small wick, means like a cotton wick. We make the candle also out of that cotton wick. Yes, so it is a very small, here it is appearing big, it is like a wick, it is passed through something like a grommet, yes, on the grommet is put on the tympanic membrane through which this wick is passed, and it is made to lie on the round window membrane, and through this wick continuous infusion of certain drugs is given. So what is in which order do we give the drugs? What drugs do we give in which order? So the first, yes, how we pass it, just see here. It is passed through the round window. That is a question of your exam. So what is the first drug that we give? The first thing that we give is steroids. So if the patient is not benefiting by medical management, okay, so no benefit by medical management. Then we give transtympanic. We give steroids. So what the steroids does is it acts on the aquaporin channels and it regulates the inner ear hemostasis. So usually in 70 to 80% of the patients who are not benefiting by medical management, this usually helps. Transtympanic steroids help. Now if it is not benefiting, next, what do we give next is, now steroids is not benefiting, So then we do not have any other option other than to destroy the inner hair cells of the Christian maculae by giving ototoxic drug. And this ototoxic drug that we give should be acting only on the hair cells of the Christian maculae. How is the hearing of the patient of Peniers? Hearing is fluctuating. Yes, which means that the hearing after the episode becomes okay, it becomes good. So we do not want to give any ototoxic drug which will destroy the hearing also, and it will destroy the vestibular hair cells also. It should not act on the organ of Cotta hair cells. So yes, what drugs are those? Yes, these drugs are streptomycin and gentamicin. Now more selective is gentamicin. Streptomycin and gentamicin, they act on the Christian maculae hair cells. They act on the type 1 and type 2 hair cells of the Christian maculae. But if they are given in high dose, they can also act on the inner and outer hairs of the organ of Cotta. Yes, so they are not totally selective, but yes, in low dose they are selective, they are vestibulotoxic. So then we can give vestibulotoxic drugs. Second, if the steroids are not benefiting, through the same route, through the transtympanic route, through the microwave, we can give vestibulotoxic drug. Vestibulotoxic drugs like streptomycin, like gentamicin. Streptomycin was earlier given. Nowadays what is given is gentamicin because this is more selective. So now if it is asked in your exam, what we will mark is gentamicin, and this giving specific vestibulotoxic drug to destroy the labyrinth is what is known as destroying the labyrinth, doing a labyrinthectomy with chemicals. This is known as chemical labyrinthectomy. Chemical labyrinthectomy. It is asked chemical labyrinthectomy is done with which drug? With gentamicin. Labyrinthectomy, so that the inner ear is not able to sense the imbalance. Now sometimes we know that gentamicin, if given in high doses, can also lead to cochleotoxicity. It will not now remain selective vestibulotoxic drug. So in patients in whom there is debilitating vertigo but the hearing is very nice, if you tell them that I will give you this drug, I will put it into the inner ear, and if the response does not come, I will have to increase the dose, and that can lead to a hearing loss also. Will that be acceptable? Will he agree? No, he will not agree. Then in that case, what option do we have? Yes, in that case, what option we have is to selectively destroy only the vestibular part, and that is by selectively sectioning the vestibular nerve. So then we can go for, if the hearing is good, then we can go for vestibular neurectomy. Vestibular nerve section, that is vestibular neurectomy. And if the inner ear is actually, the patient has had so many repeated episodes of Meniere's that the inner ear, which is the hearing part, is totally gone, the hearing loss is a lot, the hearing loss is too much, and the vestibular part is creating imbalance. Yes, and that is leading to vertigo. So in that case, there is no function of the inner ear left. The vestibular part is creating problem and the cochlear part is no good. In that case, no need to preserve the inner ear. You can go for total labyrinthectomy also. So you can go for total labyrinthectomy. So the first management is always medical management. You give medical management aiming to treat vertigo. You give medical management aiming to increase the reabsorption of endolymph by vasodilators, by you can try to decrease the pressure of endolymph by diuretics. If nothing works, then you have to go for transtympanic medication. The most safest is steroids. So first you give steroids. Not benefiting, if the hearing is not too good, then you can give low dose gentamicin. If by chance the hearing is very good and the patient is it is not acceptable to the patient that he can lose hearing in 1 year, so then we go for selective vestibular nerve section. Yes, that is an invasive procedure. We will have to operate to selectively destroy the vestibular nerve. That is used either as a salvage procedure or it is used only in patients where the hearing is very good, or you can go for total labyrinthectomy. Now also, sometimes just decompressing the endolymphatic sac helps. What is endolymphatic sac? Yes, we know what happens in endolymphatic sac is absorption of endolymph. Where is it present?
Where is the endolymphatic sac present? Yes, we can see here that this here is the endolymphatic sac. From the utricle and saccule comes a duct, endolymphatic duct, which joins to form the endolymphatic sac, and this is for absorption of endolymph. We want to decompress it. Decompress it means we want to remove the bone overlying it so that it gets space for expansion, and it has been postulated that this also endolymphatic sac decompression also helps. So, is it a very major surgery? Is it a very difficult surgery? Not at all. Do you know where the endolymphatic sac is present? Yes, where you will have to operate to remove the bone overlying the endolymphatic sac. Do you know that? Okay, so here, if this is the ear, okay, can you tell me which is the posterior part and which is the anterior part? So this here, we know that wherever we see the semicircular canals, that is the posterior part. So this is the mastoid area, and this is the anterior part, right? This is the anterior part. So this is the part, we know this is the middle ear here. This is the face here, right? This is the mastoid. The posterior is the mastoid. So which means that when we see through the mastoid, we see the semicircular canals through the mastoid antrum. When we have drilled the mastoid, we see the semicircular canals. So how will we know where the endolymphatic sac is? Yes, we have done that in anatomy. We draw a line from the lateral semicircular canal, bisecting the posterior semicircular canal, and this endolymphatic sac will be lying just below that. Which means, yes, if we are seeing here, we have drilled the mastoid. We have reached up till the medial most wall of the antrum. Here we can see the semicircular canals bulging this side. Yes. So where will we will draw a line from the lateral semicircular canal bisecting the posterior semicircular canal. Can you tell me the name of this line? Yes, this is what is known as the Donaldson's line. Donaldson's line, and the endolymphatic sac will lie below it. So this area, you are on the medial wall of the antrum. You just have to drill this area, and in this area, the moment you remove the bone, you will see the endolymphatic sac lying on the dura of the posterior cranial fossa. We know that this endolymphatic sac is present. Where is it present? Yes, so this is the two. Yes, we have the skull here. We have the lining. We have the pia of the meninges, we have the pia, we have the arachnoid, we have the dura, and the dura here in the brain has two layers. It has a meningeal layer and it has a endosteal layer. So in between these two lies the endolymphatic sac. Here lies the endolymphatic sac on the dura of the posterior cranial fossa. So you just remove this bone, and what is this bone? This is the bone here on the medial most wall of the antrum. So decompression of endolymphatic sac is another management for Meniere's. Yes, so here can you tell me where will you drill to remove the bone overlying the endolymphatic sac, to decompress the endolymphatic sac? Yes, so just whenever you see a picture like this, always try to orient yourself. Don't just jump into finding whatever has been marked there and whatever has been asked. Always orient yourself. Yes, so we are seeing the semicircular canal, so that is the posterior part. So we already know the one that has been opened is the mastoid. This is the anterior part, that is the face. Where we see the semicircular canals, that is in the upper part. We know that the superior semicircular canal bulges superiorly in the base of skull. So this is the superior part and this is the inferior part, right? So in the posterior part, here we are seeing the sigmoid sinus. Now which semicircular canals are this? We know the one that is closest to the mastoid, that is the posterior semicircular canal. It is named posterior because it is posteriorly. And the one that bisects it, that is the lateral semicircular canal. So we are going to draw a line here. Just below this, here will be the area of the endolymphatic sac. So this is where you are going to drill. So this line is the Donaldson's line, and this is the area of endolymphatic sac for decompression of endolymphatic sac, which means that you most of the time already drill the mastoid up till that area to remove the disease from the mastoid. So all you have to do is just drill a little more, expose the endolymphatic sac. So now quickly keep your pens down, sit straight. Yes, you are sitting in the ENT OPD. Here is a patient who has come to you with a complaint of, what complaint will make you think that this can be Meniere's? What complaint? Vertigo. Okay, so here is a patient who has come to you with vertigo. What presentation of vertigo will tell you that this can be Meniere's? Yes, it is never for less than 20 minutes, never for more than 24 hours. So he will have for maybe he is having for 2 hours, for 4 hours, 6 hours. And usually the vertigo of peripheral origin usually is associated with nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps. It is associated with vagal symptoms. So the vertigo here usually has vagal symptoms. What are vagal symptoms? Nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, diarrhea. So usually these can be present. Okay, so how will you know that this vertigo is because of Meniere's? Is because of the duration. Okay, how do you know that this is Meniere's only? This vertigo is maybe it is because of Meniere's. How do you know that this is Meniere's only? The inner ear is only involved. That is leading to vertigo. How can you confirm? Yes, what will be the hearing loss? It will be sensorineural. What frequency will be affected early? Low frequency will be affected early. Any other feature of hearing you know of? What will be the typical hearing loss? Yes, fluctuating hearing loss because of distortion of organ of Corti. What will be the symptom? There will be frequency distortion. There will be loudness distortion. What is frequency distortion known as? Diplacusis. What is intolerance to loud sounds known as? Recruitment. Yes. So now all these symptoms are suggesting that this is Meniere's. Will this patient have drop attacks? Yes or no? Can this patient have drop attacks? Yes or no? Yes, drop attacks. What is that known as? Tumarkin crisis. Yes, vertigo and loud sounds. Can this patient have? Yes, he can have. What is that known as? Yes, Tullius phenomena. So here is a patient with all these complaints: vertigo, deafness, tinnitus, fullness, Tumarkin crisis. Patient can have Tullius phenomena. So he has all these symptoms, or maybe just vertigo, deafness, tinnitus, fullness. This is sufficient to diagnose that this is Meniere's. These symptoms in the history. And now how will you confirm that this is Meniere's? Which is the best test investigation to diagnose that this is Meniere's? Best is electrocochleography. What on electrocochleography will tell you that this is Meniere's? Yes, you have to tell me quickly. Yes, SPI-AP ratio more than 45%. That is diagnostic of Meniere's. Along with electrocochleography, what test do you do? Glycerol test. Yes, you have confirmed that this is Meniere's. What will be your main management? Very good. Labyrinthine sedatives. Which is the most common vasodilator that is used? Beta histine is a derivative of histamine. Okay, how can you destroy the vestibular sensing mechanism? What are the methods if the patient is not benefiting by medical management? What are the destructive methods? Yes, chemical labyrinthectomy. Chemical labyrinthectomy is done with which drug most commonly? Gentamicin. If the hearing is very good in the patient, then how can you do the destructive procedure? Selectively destroy the vestibular part. Vestibular neurectomy. Endolymphatic sac decompression is a mode of management for which condition? Meniere's. Salt restriction is given in which condition of the ear? Yes, again for Meniere's. What is the landmark for endolymphatic sac? Donaldson's line. Yes, Donaldson's line. So, whenever a patient comes to you, this is how you will diagnose that this is a patient of Meniere's, and this is how you will treat this patient.